Welcome to another episode of the HeroFront podcast, where we delve deep into the stories and insights of individuals making a difference in their communities and beyond. I'm your host, Josh White, and today we have a very interesting guest joining us. You see, in this episode, we are so privileged to be in conversation with Mr. Stephen G. Callon, a retired Chief Master Sergeant and the esteemed Drug Demand Reduction Program Manager, also known as DDR, for the Air Force Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. Mr. Callon brings a wealth of experience and wisdom to our discussion as we explore the critical realms of drug demand reduction and the origins, evolution, and purpose of drug testing within the military. We also go into some drug testing lore, which was one of my favorite parts, where I got to ask all of the urban legends surrounding DDR. We also went from start to finish on how the entire process goes down. Throughout our conversation, we'll uncover the intricate dynamics of military life, the challenges of substance abuse prevention, and the transformative power of leadership. From his extensive military career to his role as a dedicated drug and alcohol counselor, Mr. Callon's insights offer invaluable perspectives on navigating the complexities of drug demand reduction in the military and government. Whether you're a supervisor seeking answers, someone who is worried they might fail a drug test, or simply someone wanting to educate yourself on this unique program, all are welcome, and thank you for joining us. Without further ado, let's get Welcome to the HeroFront podcast, the 2022 Veteran Podcast of the Year winner. I'm your host, Josh White, and I talk with heroes around the world to inspire, educate, and to remind you that you are not alone. My own personal journey was marked by struggles like depression and alcoholism, which led me to almost lose my life. Now, after years of working on myself, I'm now blessed to say I have an abundance of pride and purpose, and I have made it my mission to share and spread these lessons by having insightful interviews with inspiring individuals, emphasizing trust, transparency, and meaningful conversation to drive positive action in our lives. Above all, I aim to inspire you to unleash your inner hero. We all have it in us, and it's time to bring it to the front lines of our lives. Let's get after it. And then I wave to the camera, so I know I have to line up that audio, this audio with that video.
Sure.
The problem is there's a ever so slight lag.
Yeah.
So although the deviation is, you can't even see it at first, 5 minutes into it, it has gone like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have to cut the audio, move it every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I have not found a way around that yet.
So you got to take 5.
Luckily, I can do all that in iMovie.
Yeah.
But Steve Callon, very unique person that we have here today. And I have your title as the DDR Program Manager for AFMC.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, Drug Demand Reduction Program Manager, for those that don't know what DDR is. Drug Demand Reduction Program Manager, yeah.
And, you know, I'm public health by trade, which deals a lot with like COVID, diseases, STIs, like sexually transmitted stuff, and contact tracing. And I notice like sometimes public health can be a bit uncomfortable, and sometimes we don't get the attention or love we deserve because it's an awkward job sometimes, right? Like physical therapy is getting like flowers given to them, chocolates.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of see, you know, DDR in a similar vein, right? Like it's not like something to celebrate sometimes. You know, and sometimes I don't think it gets the attention, the love, and the conversation that it deserves because it's a sensitive topic and can be uncomfortable sometimes. What do you think?
Well, it's an uncomfortable business. You know, we've got a reputation for the drug testing part of the mission. You know, and you're very familiar with what that looks like. You know, to have to go provide your specimen in front of somebody else. So obviously, that's the reputation that we have. And I can tell you, early on in my career, I was a drug alcohol counselor, and part of that was the drug demand reduction. And you didn't get invited to a lot of parties when
Right.
you're the they didn't invite us or the chaplains to the parties. I remember I was doing augmentee duty. They had us doing transportation augmentee on an exercise, and I'm pretty quiet about, I go in and I'm there for probably about 2 or 3 days, and people are, no one's asked me who I am or anything. So finally someone turned around and they go, where do you work? And I said, well, I work in ADAPT. And they turned around and goes, how come nobody told me there was an ADAPT counselor in the building?
They're like, wait, quick. They're doing like an inventory of their conversation.
Yeah. They were talking about partying and somebody, some of the, the crazy stuff that had happened. And I'm like, hey, it's cool. I'm not on duty. I'm here today as a transportation augmentee. I'm loading pallets.
Different hat.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right.
So, Steve, what I typically start with is 3 random questions called the Hero's Gauntlet before we even start the conversation.
Okay.
And you wouldn't know that because you're new to this.
I am new to this.
Right? You haven't heard any of my episodes. This is your first podcast. So very, very thankful to have you on today.
You called it what, the Hero's Gauntlet?
The Hero's Gauntlet.
So it sounds like I'm about to take a beating.
It's not. I just couldn't think of anything more clever. So don't let the name scare you.
Yeah, all right.
So the first question, we'll start it easy. What is your go-to leadership book? One that you revisit time and time again?
Yeah, so when I was on active duty, it was pretty much anything by John Maxwell.
Oh, he's an old school man. John C. Maxwell?
I just tell you my age right there, right? And of course, there was always the 7 habits of highly effective people.
Stephen Covey.
Covey, yeah. No matter how many times I read that, every time I went back, it's kind of like, how did I miss that the last time? As I grew and got older and, had my family and got new jobs, and I'd go back and read it, sharpening the saw and all that stuff. I was like, oh, now I know what that means. But early on, it was good. It sounded really nice, but I didn't fully grasp it until I had lived it a little while. So
absolutely,
those are two of my go-to authors for sure.
And John C. Maxwell, to this day, he has like a leadership course now. Basically, you can become him, like a coach, a speaker.
Yeah, I
can't afford it right now, but it looks cool. It looks fun. So he's still getting after it.
He's still writing books. The literature still, stuff's still coming out. Content is it's unending material. So,
and unfortunately, Stephen Covey passed away.
I'm very
in like a mountain bike accident or something.
Yeah, he was in his 70s riding a mountain bike and evidently fell. Had my understanding, a head injury, and that's unbelievable.
Right.
Yeah.
But his book will live on.
But if you're going to go, I guess that's that. Yeah, I went out, onto my bike
as an old guy riding a mountain bike through the mountains. That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah. So good for him.
Yeah. All right. Second question. You are a retired chief.
I am a retired chief.
How long have you been retired?
Yeah, I retired in October of 2009 was when I started terminal leave. So that was 24 years in. So it's been a long time, Yeah. It was 24 years of active duty, and here it's been 15 years. It's just flying by,
Wow, that's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, well, the 24 years went fast as well. So it's one of those things. You wake up and you're thinking, well, I'm 10 years. I might as well stay for 20. And next thing you know, it's 20. And now what do I do?
So my question. That wasn't the question.
That's not the gauntlet.
That wasn't the question.
That was pretty easy.
That was the prepare for the question.
Okay.
So my question is, you've been out the service for a while. You were a chief. Do you miss it? Is there any parts of it that you miss and that you still think about to this day?
Yeah, I've had this discussion with my peers, my friends who retired at the same time. I'm fortunate. I'm still working with the Air Force. I said, to me, it was an easy transition, even though I can tell you for probably about 6 months, I was in a fog, as a civilian. I retired and walked straight into my current position. And even with that, I was probably in a fog for about 6 months. I was still trying to come to grips with this new, my new role. But fortunately, I was still doing kind of the same thing for the Air Force. And now my buddies who retired and they didn't hire back in with the Air Force, it really was a crisis. It was everything changed. Not only were they not wearing the uniform, but they were working with folks who didn't know what what core values were.
Right.
I was still working with the Air Force, still doing similar work that I did, and so for me, it was it's been seamless. In fact, for probably about until 2021, I was still responsible for the enlisted 4 Charlies, 4 Charlie meaning mental health techs, in AFMC. So I was still hanging out with the chiefs, civilian, but I was still hanging with the chiefs. So my transition's been easy. So I'm not the norm. And
okay. Well,
I'm very blessed.
It still sounds like, that's sage advice. Like you found your community, in your retirement life, and you still kind of carry that to this day. Yeah.
Obviously, I was the ones with the longer hair and the beard. Of course, now under today's standards, there may be a few of them out there wearing the uniform with beards.
There's beards everywhere now.
Yeah.
I drive by beards all day on the road, and I'm just like, how is this so common now? Like,
Yeah.
I've been in 19 years, so when I see all these dudes with beards, I'm like, this is insane.
Yeah.
Like, it's just an odd thing to see.
I stayed clean shaven until 2015 when my son commissioned. He was enlisted, and so when he commissioned, I obviously put my uniform on and had the honor of giving him his first salute.
That's amazing.
And of course, he coined me. I got the coin.
You got the first coin.
I got the first coin, and then I didn't shave after that. So once he commissioned, it was kind of like, tag, you're it. And so then I felt like it was okay to,
wow,
not necessarily let my hair down, but let it grow for sure. So
definitely. And my dad, he was enlisted, went to officer, retired Air Force, and he's the one who swore me in at MEPS.
Uh-huh.
That was really cool. So it's always amazing to see like the father or the mother with their child, and it's quite literally like passing it on to them, and it's a very special moment.
It was special to me. I hope it was special to my son as well. I think it was, but to me, I was retired as a chief. He was doing well as enlisted. He was in the fight from the beginning. He was 3 deployments in about 5 years. And all the places that mom and dad don't want their young sons and daughters to go, but he was there, and so it was nice to see him commission and go. He was on his way to being the chief. I'm cool with that. But then when he said he was thinking he was going to apply for a commission, I said, "Good for you to do that." Yeah,
absolutely. So. Okay, third question: what is the oddest thing you've seen working in the drug demand reduction program?
Well, I can tell you this, there's no surprises. It's not just the drug alcohol world. I worked in mental health, drug alcohol counseling, and drug testing. And, you'd be in a counseling session and somebody would bring up something, they'd want to disclose something. And I'm pretty good at keeping my cool and being pretty much maintaining the same demeanor no matter what. And so afterwards I'd come out and I say, hey, this just happened. And people are like, what did you do? How did you handle it? How did you keep a straight face on that? It's like, that's what I'm getting paid to do. There's nothing that you can tell me right now that would surprise me, and so I can't really go in. Of course, drug testing, it's all potty humor. And so there's a lot of stories around that we won't go into this here, but it's all potty humor. And so there's all kinds of stories we could go into there. But so I couldn't even begin to tell you what exactly one point that I'd feel comfortable sharing.
They're too wild.
In mental health, drug, alcohol, or any of that stuff, it's like anything's possible.
Anything is possible.
Human nature is wild. So
yes, and I volunteered here. I've been here 3 months. My time's coming to a close soon, but I mean, even in my 3 months, I've seen a few odd situations. And and I also feel bad for people. It's their choice, obviously, but when they have to come back and get those follow-up tests, which I had no idea was a thing, those follow-up tests after they fail one, and just seeing their demeanor get smaller and smaller time after time. But we'll get into that. And then the bonus question. So we're going to say the question 3, we're going to have to pass because it's rated R, and this podcast is PG-13.
Okay, all right.
So we'll just have to skip that one. So I'm going to hit you with the bonus one.
Okay.
What is your proudest Air Force moment? The moment that you'll just remember forever, where you felt like, wow, like your unique touch on the Air Force was applied.
Oh, wow. So there's so many. I talked about my first salute for my son. Obviously, I have an airman. She was a first-term airman. She went on to be a 12 Outstanding Airman of the Year. Obviously, seeing like children, like airmen, you want them to go beyond where you're at. Right. I had mentors, and I had one of I'm going to mention his name here because he deserves the honor, was Mike Gardner. Mike was my mentor, and he didn't get promoted to chief, and he should have, but he didn't. And so but the mentoring he gave me, he catapulted me far beyond where he went, and so as a sergeant, as a master, any rank, you're hoping that the folks that you're leading go far beyond where you're at. Same thing with your children. You're just a stepping stone for them to help give them the boost. And I say stepping stone, meaning that you want them to climb on your shoulders to get to the next level. And so Mike was that for me. And so the day that it kind of sounds kind of odd, the day that I surpassed him was I couldn't help but think he should have been there as well. Right. And so to me, that's a defining moment. Anytime you can, to me, go beyond your mentors, that's a very special moment. Right,
because that was their goal the whole time. And as I've mentored folks throughout the years, it's kind of like you're just trying to get them where you're at quicker. Like, these are the mistakes I made. These are the things I wish I would have known. It's like you're just trying to give them like the cheat code that like you're kind of talking to yourself in the past.
Yeah, there is a cheat code, There is some things you need to know.
Right.
And like I said, for Mike, he was there for me. He was a great example. He taught me to drink a lot of coffee. So I'll give him that as well.
Nice.
I remember I was doing a mentoring session and they said, "Hey, would you like a cup of coffee?" And I said, "Not really." He goes, "Well, mentoring session's over. I can't do anything for you if you don't want a cup of coffee." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll have a cup of coffee." So those are kinds of things. I mean, we could talk all day about those moments, and thank God that I have them.
Right.
A lot of people have poured a lot into me, and there's been times when I look back. You talk about those proudest moments. To think that someone took the time and wanted to do something for me is a very special feeling, because it wasn't what I expected.
Right.
So
that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
All right. So we're going to go into our 3 topics. Okay. The first one is the point of the drug demand reduction program, because a lot of folks, they might be new or they just don't know. Like, hey, I show up, I pee. I'm not sure what happens after that,
Sure.
And so that's the first topic. The second topic is going to kind of tie into where folks might have made a bad choice, some stories that you've seen, some trends, and how thinking of your future, especially now when you first joined, you're the most vulnerable demographic, right? And so thinking of your future, that's the second topic. The third topic is the future of the program and the policy. So let's start with the first topic, the whole point of DDR. Why does it exist?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I actually came into the drug testing world in 1992. And, that's a long time ago for sure. But at that time, drug demand reduction actually came around 1993. I kind of shared this story yesterday in Miss Hudson's retirement ceremony. Originally, drug demand reduction was nothing but outreach and prevention.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was kind of like DARE.
DARE was separate, but definitely a part of this. We initially, DDR was about developing coalitions, and DARE definitely was a part of that coalition. And so you're spot on there, very similar. Up until that point, our our approach to prevention was more of interdiction, meaning we wanted to catch drug dealers, and we were trying to keep the drugs from coming in from South America. And I told the story yesterday. It's like think Miami Vice, the show Miami Vice, so it was about stopping the supply. And in 1993, and I don't know who it was, if it was in a National Defense Authorization or if it's DOD, but somebody said, what if we take away the demand? Evidently, we're catching a lot of people and keeping them coming in, but there's still a lot of money being made. What if we take away the demand? There's no customers. Nobody wants it. So why are you going to risk your life and jail and all that stuff to bring drugs into America if there's nobody buying it? And so we had a shift, and they threw a lot of money at us. And for the DOD, at least for the Air Force, they said, we challenge you. And I happened to be at Shaw Air Force Base at the time. And fortunately, I was a young staff sergeant, and there was very seasoned people above me that were actually had the task of coming up with a plan. And they said, we want you to go out into the community, outside the fence. Initially, DDR was outside the fence. We want you to build a coalition with the schools, the police department, which was DARE, and find out what's already exists. There's pockets of people trying to do the exact same thing you are, and let's bring them together and unite them. And you give us a budget, and we'll give you the money. And we were very successful at it. We pulled in the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, schools, churches.
That sounds like more of a future investment, right? You're teaching them early so that by the time they get to that age, they're already prepared.
It was targeting children, exactly. We were looking at the future. We were looking at future, and so that was very, very successful. And then, of course, it was on the base, so it was coalition, and then eventually we branched out, and it became inside the fence. And the reason they chose right outside the fence, because think about it: who lives around the base?
The locals,
but also those military families. Yeah.
Right.
So we were in the schools with the kids, Master Sergeant so-and-so's son and daughter there. So that's how it started. And it still is about outreach and prevention, because if you look at the Executive Order 12564, which established the drug-free workplace in the 1986, it had 5 components. It said for federal agencies, you got to establish a policy. What is your policy around drug use in your agency? So for DOD, what is your policy? You got to make it clear what your policy is. You've got to educate supervisors on how to identify folks who may be struggling and how to get them to help, get them resources. Third part was, how do you educate employees about what the boundaries are? We think that most folks don't want to use drugs if they know that there's a boundary. They want to stay inside the boundary. And the fourth one was for those folks who have crossed the line. Despite the education, they've still crossed the line, and they're finding themselves that they needing help getting out of their drug use. So that was the fourth component. And the fifth one was that now we're finally getting to drug testing.
Right.
And so that's number 5. And if you ask folks now on the base, what do you think drug demand reduction program is, they'll say drug testing. They don't say outreach and prevention. They don't realize that initially
it's grassroots. That's what it was.
It's all deterrence. Yeah, and it was all about deterrence. Even the drug testing program is about deterrence, saying you might get caught and get in trouble, so don't go there.
It's almost flipped now. It's like all testing and a lot less of the outreach. Why is that?
Well, it's that which gets measured gets repeated, and so it's kind of hard to measure the outreach and prevention component. It's like all the other issues social issues that we're trying to throw resources at, like suicide prevention and sexual assault. It's hard to measure the success. Are we having an impact? Well, drug testing, we know how many specimens we collected. We know how many positives there were. And so I think that was part of it. And so that's kind of has morphed over the 30 years to now where the emphasis is on the drug testing. And by the way, if you got time left over, do some education.
It's not just that program with that philosophy. Like, I've seen that shift with everything. Like the things that you can't immediately quantify have started to like fall to the wayside. It's just an odd thing that I've noticed. Yep. And so you're telling me there was a time where the Air Force existed where they did not drug test.
Oh, it would have So drug testing started in the 80s, probably early 80s. But it really took on with the executive order of 1986 with the drug-free workplace. There was an incident with the Navy. There was an incident on a ship, and when they did the investigation, they found there was a substantial number of the individuals involved. They had drugs in their system, and that's when President Reagan used that situation to say, okay, we're going to start drug testing. Of course, we had the reputation of the Vietnam era folks. It's whether it's myth or accuracy, it's known for drug use. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was at that point that DOD started to say, hey, we need to clean this up. We really need to police this.
Yeah, and the DOD, it's always like, hey, all the rules are from one person's mistake. It sounds like this boat was the catalyst.
It can be, yeah. I remember when I first retrained at that time, at that time it was called Social Actions, and when I retrained in, we had filing cabinets, just a wall full of filing cabinets of drug testing records of individuals who had tested positive. And we were told you can't destroy those because there may be litigation. And, we held on to those for probably 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And there were quite a few.
That's overkill.
Yeah. And so I don't want to exaggerate that there was a huge problem, but there was use. And so as a result of that, we've come a long ways since that time period. So there was drug testing. It had a beginning, and it's still going on.
And then another point of the program is kind of like what Colonel Skalicki talked about yesterday at Karen's retirement, which was, me as a pilot. Ultimately, you're protecting me, because he was basically getting at, he didn't want people under the influence of something working on his jet or some part of the mission that could ultimately lead to an oversight and something happening to that pilot.
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys talk about at the high echelons?
Yeah. So if you look at it, if you look at all our guidance, and one of the first statements in there always talks about readiness. Well, readiness. Are we ready to go? And some of these things distract. For sure, they put into question, are you ready to go to war? So that's ultimately good order and discipline comes in there. Can we maintain good order and discipline? Are we ready to go fight? So that we are concerned that drug use would interfere with that. And I used to always tell folks, and I would still tell you today, the thing about the military that I appreciated the most is its precision. When we have an operation, we want people have to be at a certain place at a certain time, because we're all expecting them to be at that certain place at that certain time, because it's depending upon other pieces of the war. And unfortunately, we got evidence to suggest that folks are under the influence. They don't show up where they're supposed to be at the right time. Right. And so that can have
their priorities are different.
It could repercussion. Well, just anything that we already have human error, right? We already got human error working against us, and you throw a chemical in there, and that just adds to it.
Absolutely.
And so that's the risk that we have. So if you were to ask me, that's why we drug test. It's about readiness and stuff. And of course, then you get into wellness. We want people to be healthy. We got enough evidence that there's a certain percentage of folks that they use your public health. Not everybody that does this will have this, but there's a pretty good percentage of folks that does this. They're going to have something bad, down the road, their liver, their
Right.
pancreas, their internal organs are all of a sudden woke up and said, enough's enough.
Right. Absolutely. So, could you run us through like the process? All we know as the customer is I pee in a cup while someone awkwardly stares at it. What happens after that? We don't know.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of myths. Every now and then we laugh about it because we'll hear every now and then about people will say, yeah, what they do is they take all the urine down to the lab and they dump it into a big bucket. And
was
they
that
test.
ever a thing? Ever?
No, it was never.
Then where did that come from? Because I was told that when I was a new airman, they're like, yeah, they pour it on this big bucket. If it comes positive, they call you back in, and then they spend extra money to have individual tests to narrow it down to that person. I can't tell you how many times I heard that when I was coming up. So where did that even come from?
It was probably somebody's grandpa telling them a story.
So to your knowledge, that has never been a thing.
It has never been a thing. Yeah, you can't defend that, and everything. So we tell this to folks when we train our collectors. You're collecting evidence, right? So if you know anything about evidence, it's got to be collected a certain way, certain procedures and there's going to be a chain of custody,
right?
And so if you're doing all that effort to be so specific in the procedures you use to collect it and track it, then why would you dump it all into a pot? But hey, it makes a good story.
I hate that story because I always picture a big vat of urine, and like someone like stirring it. I just hate that imagery.
You can almost smell it, right?
Right. Another myth is that I'm being targeted. I keep coming back, and oddly enough, you do see some people come back, or hey, I went on leave, so that's why you're calling me in. Could you speak on those myths that drive people nuts, that they are convinced are a reality?
Yeah, so that's a good point, and there is a good chance if you come back from leave that you may be selected, and that's important to know. That we want people to know that when you're home around the old team that you actually joined the military to get away from, that you got to behave yourself. You can't play by the same rules.
But there's a reason you get tested when you get back, right?
There is a reason. Yeah, the reason is you not guaranteed, not 100%,
right.
But you may have been selected while you were gone.
Exactly.
So drug testing can happen every day, right? They're running a roster every day. And if your name comes out while you're on leave, you don't get a free pass. They just push you. When they talk to the trusted agent, the unit, the question they'll have is say, "Hey, Callon's on leave." The question is, when will he be back? And they go, well, he's due back from leave on the 15th. Well, so they'll put into the selection software that Callon will be back on the 15th, and on the 15th, my name will kick out. And if I'm back on the base, I'm notified.
And so, yes, I love that you told that story because people need to know that, especially when they're on leave and certain civilians are presenting them things, it's good to know the process that, yes, you may get tested when you get back, not because someone's watching you, but because the system randomly picked you. You were not there, and it's basically scheduled for the future at that point when you get back.
Yep, it's a statistics. Statistically, you're at risk of being selected, and even when you're on leave, you're still. And so that means you may have one waiting on you when you get back.
Okay, so how about hey, I'm being targeted. You've tested me 3 times this month. Why are you doing this to me? What about those folks?
Yeah, statistics again. We are actually we don't have any influence on who the random compute that generates the name, and it's actually the software. My understanding of it, it's actually developed by a contractor, and they have certain parameters, and they have to run it through statistical analysis, and it has to meet it. My understanding is it doesn't actually go in and look for names. So what happens when we upload the roster of names? It'll assign you to some position in the computer, a location. And so when the random generator generates a list, it doesn't actually generate names. It generates numbers. And then it'll go to like number 62. And whatever name is associated with 62, that person is selected. So it's not looking at names. We don't look at names. The computer, the Air Force, and in fact, DOD mandates that we use a random generator that we cannot influence it. And the commander has enough tools. If there's somebody that she or he believes is using drugs, there's enough other tools at their disposal to use as a commander to intervene, to go to that individual to determine if drug use.
So to my understanding, if it is selected, that person would be very clear to that person that, hey, this is commander driven. This is not random. They would know that upon being notified. Yeah,
it's a random. It's going to come random. Yeah. So example, we have the lawyers, our legal team. Great. They oversee it to make sure, because if we have a result, our ultimate goal is deterrence. Right, random testing is deterrence, just to say, hey, you could get selected, don't use. But if we do have a positive, then we want to make sure that we have collected it in a manner that we've not only collected, but we also selected in a manner that commander, that she can use it to take whatever administrative or UCMJ action that he or she wants to do. And so if we circumvent that, if we cheat that, then the commander's hands all of a sudden becomes tied, and there's limits on what they could do with it. So there's no need to target anybody, because we have other mechanisms. We have OSI, we have investigators that are looking for, and so there's a lot of mechanisms to identify those folks that we think, there's no benefit to us to target somebody and then not be able to use those results.
I guess what I'm asking is, I think OSI is a good example. Let's say OSI is like, we know our intel suggests this individual is using drugs, and OSI wanted to test that person. If that person were to be tested intentionally, would they know, or would it still appear to be random?
Okay, so when we notify them, it's very clear. Yeah, so the letter they get for a random drug test, it says you were randomly selected. If it's part of an investigation, they'll get that letter saying you're being as probable cause or commander directed. It'll specify. Yeah,
which I think that's important to know, especially for people that think like, I keep getting picked. You would actually be presented a different letter if that were the case.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. And if they don't, then in that case, you'd have some recourse. Right. I think if they were targeting you and let's say you did have a positive, of course nobody's going to have a positive, but if you did, then obviously there would be recourse. Like I said, there would be limitations on what the commander could do with those findings.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about like where this urine goes. So someone pees in a bottle.
Yeah.
It gets sealed in front of them.
Yep.
They sign the label. They had an observer. There's three initials on there. Where does that bottle go after that?
Yeah. So before it, in the presence of the individual, it's sealed, right? A tamper resistant. It's not tamper proof, is tamper resistant. It's very clear that if someone messes with that tape, it's very evident. And so then there's protocols at the lab. So it gets shipped to the lab in San Antonio. They have very strict custody and control. When they get it, they're going to inspect it, and if it gives any appearance that bottle has been tampered with, or the tape there's any tears in it, anything, then it's an untestable. They won't proceed because it's not secure. So there's questions about the integrity of it. Very strict about it too. And I can tell you, we get untestables all the time. And for just when you handle the bottle so much, in packaging and stuff like that, it can be damaged. And so when it shows up at the lab, if there's any tears or anything in that tamper evident tape, they're going to kick it out. They're not going to use it. So that's where it goes.
Okay.
And then once it gets into the lab, they have very strict and everywhere they go. So going back to I wanted to follow up on your vat, your witch's brew of urine, right? So every bottle is handled individually, and so the first thing they do is they'll sign their own custody and control on it. But when they go to get urine out of that bottle, they have a test tube. They will pour it individual bottle into a test tube. And then they only handle one bottle at a time. They pour enough urine into the test tube and they seal it. They seal back the bottle, and then they'll start another one. So they handle it one-on-one. Nothing ever is introduced into the bottle. Everything is a pour out. So
Okay.
That's where it goes, and that's how it's handled.
Have you seen this place in person?
I have. It's a controlled environment. You have to actually get it's escort. I thought I was trying to get into. I've been into the Cheyenne Mountain, and it was easier to get in Cheyenne Mountain than it was to get into the drug lab.
Wow. What does the testing actually look like? Is it like going some machine? Like, how does it know what's in the urine?
Yeah, so it's all chemistry stuff. It's all geek stuff. People that got a lot of schooling. Yeah, so it goes in the test tube. It goes into an analyzer. First test looks to see if there's anything. Basically, verify if there's any drugs in there. So it actually, and if there's any, if the machine indicates there's a substance in there, then it's sent down for further testing to break it down to. So the first test, in layman's term, it says, "Oh, there's something in here." It doesn't say what. It just says there's potentially something here. And then they send it into a pretty high dollar piece of equipment that then will, a spectrum analyzer that actually tell you exactly everything that's in there.
You know, that does sound a little bit like the myth. There's 2 stages to it still.
There are definitely 2 stages.
There's like a little bit of truth in every weird story. Like, I think that is the one similarity that, there is a cheaper method applied.
Yeah.
Hey, something's in here.
Yeah.
And then it's retested with a more expensive measure that breaks it down.
Yeah, and it takes it's a little bit longer process, and then even that is analyzed by, they have a team of experts that will actually look at the results to see if it's valid, and because it's pretty serious business,
right?
And so they take it pretty serious down there. The last thing we want to do is accuse someone of illicit drug use, and it's just because our equipment was, and so they go through rigorous certifications. The lab, the equipment gets certified by an outside agency. The staff has to go through and get certified, and they're constantly throwing in. I can't think of the name, but they'll actually give them fake urine, for lack of a better word, that they'll throw in there to see if the system catches it. They'll go, "Oh, this one here," and they'll put it in amongst it, and then next thing you know, they're like, "Oh, you got it." And at a specific level, a known level, right? Mm-hmm. And so they expect the machine then to catch it.
So it's like a quality assurance
exactly.
testing.
It's all about And I'm not doing very good at explaining what it is, but they'll introduce measures in there to validate that the machines are doing what they're supposed to.
That's their secret shopper.
Yeah, and it's secret. The team doesn't even know, right?
Right.
The team that's working with it, they don't even know, but they'll report it out and they'll go, "Okay, yeah, you got it. Good for you. The machine's working correctly."
Okay, let's say it's positive. It got the second look.
Yeah.
It's positive. What happens? Let's just use Eglin as an example since we're physically sitting here. Eglin had a positive. This is in San Antonio, this urine.
Yeah.
What happens after that?
Yeah, so that gets uploaded into the drug testing software that we use, that the team uses, gets notified. They'll come in, you get an email saying, "Hey, you've got a result." First of all, you'll say you got a result, and then you open it up and you'll see, one of them's a positive. And at that time, the team will if it's a drug positive for a drug that could have been a prescription, maybe something they were prescribed, they'll send that that result over to the medical group. We have a medical review officer on staff there assigned to DDR, who will then pull medical records. They look at medical records, dental records, pharmacy records. And
that's why that current prescription list is so important. And if you pay attention, because you could miss it, not really thinking about it, but every time you see the doctor, they ask you, what prescriptions are you taking? And they always make sure that is up to date. So
you know a lot more about that in your job. Yeah. Right. So that is important to keep that. Where we're getting in trouble though, if there's a valid script, then they'll kick it back and say, "No, there's a script." And so as far as we're concerned, that's a negative.
Right.
Because they have a valid script. And where we get into trouble, people are getting care off base. They're getting care off base, and they're not communicating, like you just said, back to their doc. "Hey, you referred me off base, and they gave me a medication," but they didn't bring that back to the doc.
That actually happened to a friend of mine. Like, I don't know the exact situation. It was years ago, but he separated because of that exact situation. He had some prescription off base, then failed a test, and I believe he got discharged for that.
Well, they still will adjudicate that, and so typically what they'll do is we'll go back and change it. I can't speak to specifically to your friends, but I can tell you we've had done recently. It's usually at a GSU, recruiters. Just pick on one AFSC
because he's nowhere near a med group. Sometimes
they're getting their care in the community, and so example, we had an individual that tested positive for amphetamines, and so medical review officer says not got anything, and so kicked it back to us. We reported out. Investigators looked into it, contacted the member. Member says, I got a script and able to produce it. Called us up and said, hey, he's got a script. And so we go in and get that changed over.
So he had just a little mini panic attack there until he got his civilian provider to say,
yeah. So hopefully it wasn't too painful. I mean, it's never. I don't see how it could be good, but it's nice that it's like no, I got a script. Right. And so it's important for, like you said, to get that back to the med group so they can get that in there in case we need to screen it.
Right.
And if we screen it, it's there. In fact, a lot of the prescription medications that folks are on are military. It's already in. So the first screen that happens at the lab, a lot of folks don't know this, but they're connected into our electronic health records. And so the first thing happens if the lab, when they do the test, they say, oh, there's amphetamines, they'll automatically right then the system will go check the med records and they go, oh yeah, it's a valid script. And so we'll never even know that. It's a case by case, right? All we do in DDR is we tell the commander there's a drug in this urine. It's an illicit drug of one form or the other. Either it's a prescription med that they don't have a med. And what the commander does with it is now at their discretion.
So they're at risk. You're at risk for a possible bad outcome. It's all discretion of the situation, the member,
commander. So the commander does an investigation, like we was talking about the recruiter, and they go, oh yeah, he's got a valid script. It's over. It's like we never knew that there was a positive. Same thing in this case, you used an old script. We say, that's bad, don't do that. And then, depend upon what the commander wants to do with it, it could have a bad outcome. It could, but typically it's a case by case. And I can't say that, oh yeah, it's good, or oh no, it's bad. What I can tell you, if you're using your family members' prescriptions, that's bad.
Right. That's
you don't want to go there. If you need it, go get it and get your own is what we tell folks.
Absolutely.
If it's yours and it's old, okay, we'll deal with that, figure it out. But if it's somebody else's, definitely not going to go well for you.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's say this is a marijuana test that failed or that popped positive. The results have gotten back to Eglin. What then happens? Does the member get notified by police or their supervisor or their shirt? Like, how does that typically play out? So
according to our process that we follow, we notify the commander, the investigators, and the JAG. So those are the folks we notify. So the investigators, commander, and the legal, and then it goes from there. Usually the investigator and the commander talk about how to make contact with the member, and then it goes from there.
But typically it has an interview with the police, right? Like that's part of it typically, isn't it?
Each place is different. Some folks it's Air Force OSI. Some places it's the security force investigators. Each place is different, base to base. And I can't speak to Eglin exactly who's going to reach out and do that. Sometimes it's a tag team, I guess. Say for sure that they act faster on situations with people with security clearances or who are PRP. Or I don't know that they act any quicker, but if they did, I could understand because there's classified, there's mission, there's life, things like that are at risk.
Is it safe to say if an airman is caught with marijuana in their system that they are getting separated?
I can't speak to that with any certainty. It's going to be a case by case. It's commander's discretion. And so what they do, for years we've said drug use is a zero tolerance.
Right.
And I think that's still the policy, but I can't say, the commander still has some discretion.
Gotcha.
And so I won't say that you're definitely gone, but I can tell you our policy is still zero tolerance. Now, what the commander does with that is still up to her discretion of what she does with it.
So I actually asked legal that same question because they see this all the time, right? And I was like, have you ever seen someone, with drugs in their system not get separated? And I want to say they said one time. And that was a unique situation. I just thought that was kind of eye-opening. Like every other one that they've seen, there was a discharge.
I think that's most likely the outcome is a discharge. But like I said, I used to always ask the lawyers, what are we seeing with the positive? Are we going to court? Are we Article 15? What are we doing? And they're typically reluctant to tell you because they don't want to appear to have undue influence on a commander. Okay. Because some of that information, you're like, oh, I felt pressured into taking a certain action. So historically, the lawyers would tell me, it doesn't matter because we really don't want to go there because it could be perceived as undue influence on the commander's decision. Gotcha. And we still want it to be her discretion on what she does.
Actually, you brought me to something else I wanted to ask. Some do go to court.
Some do go to court.
And then even people that work in DDR who might have handled that urine have to go testify or something. Yeah. Could you explain why that happens?
Yeah, so if it goes to court, like I said, when the drug demand reduction team, they collect that urine, they're collecting potential evidence. Right. I talked about the chain of custody and the sealing and everything. It's potential evidence. And so when we have a positive drug test that goes to court, that's the evidence. That's gotcha. Unless we got a confession from the individual. Well, of course, if we got a confession, it's more, whether or not it go to court is questionable. But so they're going to go to court. The collection team is going to go to court to talk about the process, about the evidence. They can't say, oh yeah, he did this. They're not the subject matter expert on whether someone used or not. All they can say is, if that's the urine that we collected, this is how we collected it. And so that's what I can tell you. This was the role.
Explain their step and their procedure.
This was our process that I followed. And so if that's my name's associated with that, this is how I collected that evidence. This is the integrity of that. That's how sure you can be that the urine that was tested at the lab was the urine I collected and shipped. And so it's at court because they were presented in Article 15 and did not take the Article 15 they signed instead to go to court-martial. Sometimes, there again, it's at commander's discretion. If they want to go straight UCMJ, go court, or if they want to offer Article 15, it's going to be the discretion. I've seen both. I've seen individuals who have chose not to take the Article 15 and it ends up in court. I've seen individuals who they weren't offered an Article 15. They went straight to court. And so to me, I would think, and I don't know this for sure, I would think rank would have play into that, decision of the commander on what they were going to do with the rank of the individual, the responsibilities of the individual. If you got somebody who's, and there again, I don't want to undue influence, but if I got a doctor over here, a surgeon, and they test positive for an illegal substance, I would think we would want to take a pretty harsh approach to a surgeon who's using drugs. Right. It's a pretty dangerous thing. Right. And so, and others is like, well, maybe an Article 15 is more appropriate. Gotcha. Okay, we've talked a lot about this because it's just fascinating, and I know a lot of people have these questions because I'm a customer myself, and these are things I've thought about. So my last question on our first topic, the Bickle test. What is it? Why does it happen, and where did it get its name from? Yeah, if you do a search in the legal law or whatever, you probably won't find, if you do look in all the DDR and all that, you won't find the word Bickle. And what the Bickle was actually, it was a case. It's case law. Is that someone's name? That's somebody's name, yeah. It was somebody who had a positive UA. I'm kind of remembering, I don't have, I'm going to tell you what I remember about it. He had a positive.
This is DDR lore.
I think it's pretty accurate too. Close. I'm going to get you close. You might win a drink at the when you do trivia. But anyway, that's the actual individual who had a positive drug test, and they had subsequently did a second drug test based upon the original one, the original positive, and it tested. I believe it tested positive well. And of course, he challenged it. His lawyers and challenged it, saying, "Hey, it wasn't." The commander didn't have the authority to collect the second one. And so basically the case law says that if an individual, and this is a paraphrase again, you have to get the lawyer back on here to confirm this, but basically it says if there's a drug positive, the commander has authority to collect another one based upon the same premise, the justification that he had for the first one.
Gotcha.
And so that's the case law Bickle, which basically says if I do a random drug test and you're positive, I have the authority based upon my authority as the commander to have ordered the first test, the first random. I can piggyback on that to collect a second one and or subsequent one until you don't have they're negative. And
so the member will be tested with the Bickle test process over and over again until they see that that drug is no longer in their system. It's a commander's discretion as well. What would you say is the point of doing that? Well,
it's some places don't. There are some locations they'll do one Bickle, and if it's positive, they're done. Other commanders I've talked to, they told me, well, I'm going to keep drug testing until I get a negative because I've got an individual that I know is using drugs. Mm-hmm. So first of all, for their well-being, I gotta get them down to zero, or for the safety of the community, I got to get them zero. I got individuals driving around the base. They're no longer on the flight line. I won't let them go near the flight line, but I've got them driving on the community. I got to know that they're drug free. And so some commanders, different approaches, different
so it's very telling of the individual's current status, where their head might be at. It tells a story in a way. Hey, it's been 2 months and you're still positive. That says a lot about that individual. That should drive more questions for that individual.
It could, yeah, and that's why. A part of the drug testing program is a mandatory referral to ADAP. Because if you got an individual who was willing to push the envelope, because I think most of us, and maybe I'm assuming something here, know that drug use is not compatible with military service.
Right.
It's not new to us, but we still have folks that say, I'm willing to take the chance. And they've done it. So if you're that person, we owe it, and actually it's part of the DOD mandate, is that if you have an individual, first of all, this is not related to drug testing, but you have someone who has an alcohol-related incident or a positive drug test, the commander is mandated to make a referral to ADAP to do an assessment to see, is there a deeper issue going on here?
Right.
Obviously we're not going to use them for the mission, but now their well-being, we got to at least offer them services. And that's the key, is the commander has to offer services. Now, whether or not they take advantage of that is an individual choice. And as you alluded to, we have a few individuals, they don't take advantage of the services.
Right. Does this Bickle person know that this...
I'm sure they do.
That this is named after? Like, where is this person?
We were laughing about that earlier, like Dr. Heimlich, they got a procedure named after him. And I guess now, and I don't know this to be true, I think maybe another one of those myths we're talking about, I don't think we can call it the Heimlich maneuver anymore for whatever reason. So I don't know if Bickle, if he can get... if he can sue to get some royalties out of it, or
right, he's like, hey, I need to get paid. I didn't know y'all named that after me. Like, what?
Yeah, and it's actually case law. It's Bickle versus United States or something like that is the case law. If you want to get in,
I'm going to research that lore. I want to find Airman Bickle. I want to research this on the back end. I'll let you know what I find.
Yeah, so most places they don't know what that. I remember when I first started drug testing, like Bickle test, I'm like, what is that? And I went through all the literature, DoD directives, and all, and they don't call it that. They just call it a follow-up testing.
It's truly lore. Okay, so let's get to our second topic here. The first one went on much longer than I thought, but I think it was all great information.
I hope it was useful.
So thank you for all those answers. So thinking about the future, we have a lot of folks that fail. You see the rates, you see the trends. So I was hoping you could talk about why people should be thinking about their future, some of the repercussions you've seen, and some of the trends you've seen. That way the people that might fit that demographic might say, oh, I'm at risk. I'm one of the people that would more likely be put in a compromising situation based on their age, their location, etc. So I was hoping you could just kind of dive into all that for us.
Yeah, well, you can look outside the fence and see what's happening with all the state laws and things like that. And so at least with DoD, we're having to contend with that, whether it's recruiting, how we attract new people and qualify who's qualified to come on active duty and who's not, based upon their use of drugs prior to service. So that's obviously, we're confronted, that's hitting us straight on. It's hitting us right up front before we can even bring anybody on. And then, of course, how do we retain them? How do we keep them, drug-free, for lack of a better word, so that they're reliable and they're ready to fight once they're on wearing the uniform. And so those are the predominant issues we have right now, at least for the military. And what do we do when outside the gate it's drug use is legal? Some drug use is legal.
That's got to be I can't imagine being an airman in a time where marijuana is all around you and it's legal. I mean, that is like the most that's one of the worst things that happened to us. You know what I mean? As a retention, looking at retention, and now having these airmen surrounded by that with their peers that can do it legally. I mean, that's brutal. That's a horrible situation.
Yeah, like most things, it's a personal choice. For all of us,
right.
Whether we use alcohol, tobacco, or whatever the substance is, it's a personal choice. And really, that's what it comes down to. That's the future. Is how do we attract airmen who are okay with the lifestyle that the military gives them and demands of them.
Right.
It's tough. It's a
lot to ask, but
I love the Army, their fitness program. They call them soldier athletes. And, we're really athletes. We're not athletes like a football player. We could be. We got some former football players and stuff like. But we're got to be fit to fight. And I don't know if you've deployed, but it takes a lot out of you to deploy. Just carrying your bags, before you even get on the plane, it takes a lot out of you. So yeah, we're going to have some challenges as legislation catches up with the culture. To me, again, it always comes down to what is it you wanted to begin with? Why did you walk through the recruiter's door to begin with? I think I was telling you yesterday, when I did it, it was because I needed a change of scenery. And I felt that the Air Force could give me that. If I was going to stay where I was, I couldn't see that my life was going to get any better. And that I spent a lot of time trying to get out of stuff instead of getting into the right stuff. I was trying to talk my way out of issues, So when I enlisted, I made a decision at that point. I said, I've had a lot of regrets up to this point, and this is a fresh start. Because the good thing about the Air Force, it didn't care that I was an honor student in high school. It didn't care that I maybe got arrested for whatever. It didn't care. It says, what are you going to do for me now?
Right.
And we're going to give you that chance to do something better than what you were doing. And so for me, fortunately, I had good mentors, and I actually made a decision at that point that I wasn't going to have any regrets. I'm only going to do this for 4 years. Right?
How'd that turn out?
And then 24 years later, but somebody told me, I remember my first boss, and I'm going to shout out to Master Sergeant Ernie DeTurk. I hope he's still, I haven't talked to him in many years. But anyway, he said, what are you going to do with your career? And I said, I'm only doing 4 years. He said, okay, what are we going to do in the meantime? With the 4 years you're going to get, what do you want to accomplish? And I go, well, I don't know. I just don't want to get in any trouble. And he says, well, you got 4 years. Let's see what we can get done. And I got a lot done. And then it came time to re-enlist, and I said, hey, I like this. And so I did another 4. And so what I wanted was every time it came to time to re-enlist, I wanted it to be my decision.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be in control of my life. It's my decision. If I get out, it's my decision to stay in. And you've been around long enough, you know, there were individuals that said, I really want to re-enlist. And the commander said, nope.
Right.
You're gone. You burnt bridges. And so I always never wanted to burn a bridge. Even if my intentions were to get out, I wanted it to be my decision when it happened. So for me, drug use, substance use, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that played into that. Mm-hmm. If I knew that I had enough friends that if you have an alcohol-related incident, all of a sudden you handed control over your career and over your life to the commander.
Right.
If I had a positive drug test, it's not my decision anymore. So I said, you know, life is difficult enough, and I don't want to introduce anything into it that's going to complicate that.
I've never thought of it that way, like just the way you described it, on doing things on your terms, your decision, and how those choices forfeit that. Like completely.
Yeah.
You just handed it over to someone else now.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the people that would enlist. You know, I remember talking to people who had enlisted and they act like they had been drafted, you know, or they'd been sentenced. They go to court and they're like, oh, you're going in the Air Force. I'm like, you did volunteer for this, right?
Right. You meet those folks where you're like, why are you here, man?
This, you know, you're not a prisoner here. You chose to do this. And
right.
What's this all about, man? No, put this in perspective.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I was going to tell that story where I almost made a bad choice.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And so my first base was Anderson Air Force Base, Guam. At the time, the drinking age was 18. And so I just turned 19. And the law has since changed to 21 because, you know, folks like me who are just real immature, you know, I had no business drinking. Like, I should not have been able to drink that much at that young, right?
Yeah.
And drunk me was not to be trusted, not at all. I tell the airmen this today: don't let drunk you make the call, like make the decisions. Like, do not trust drunk version of you.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I had a bunch of close calls as an airman. I'm very fortunate.
You're very fortunate.
I either got lucky or I had good mentors.
Yeah.
But I am very fortunate. I'm not going to lie to you. But there was a time. I never did drugs, but there was a time where I almost did from peer pressure, right? Because, you know, I was still young, I was still naive, and you put alcohol in the mix. I was in a situation where a bunch of the islanders there at Guam kind of intermingled with a bunch of the airmen. And I remember going, you know, I was at a club drinking all night, you know, just going, having the time of my life. And at some point we go to like this alley, this like dark alley between buildings. And they're just like passing around marijuana. And like, I remember like it almost got to me. And all these islanders,
Yeah.
it just, the peer pressure was so high. And I was so drunk that like, I'm not sure what would have happened if that made it to my hands.
Yeah.
I didn't finish the story though. It didn't make it to my hands because someone punched someone else and it just this huge fight broke out.
Right.
That's why I never reached
saving grace. A fight.
Divine intervention.
Yeah.
It's just divine intervention.
You got to find that guy that threw the punch and thank him.
Right. But when I think back to that situation, I'm like, I was an idiot. Like, I was not thinking at all. And like, you know, it almost happened to me. And so I just tell that story for anyone who is impressionable, who is young. You add alcohol to the mix, you know, you could be in some really sketchy situations where you feel the obligation to do something that normally you would not do.
Yeah. Peer pressure is a real thing for sure. You know, we all think we're leaders, but chances are we're not. You know, because, you know, we really want to be liked. I think we want to be liked. Now, there's a few of us a little crusty. You know, I'm getting to the point where I don't care so much anymore. Mm-hmm. But you know, growing up, we don't want to be alone. You know, we're as human beings, we're not intended to be alone. Of all the animals and whatever you consider a human being to be, we are more dependent on people longer than any other creature on this earth. You know, as kids, we are carried and fed longer than any other creature.
Right.
So that to me, that means we're not intended to be alone. So that drives us to do some of the stuff you're talking about. You know, it's important to feel a part of things.
So is there any, demographic, age group, is there anyone that is at a higher risk that you've seen than others?
Well, I think obviously there is, 18 to 24-year-olds, males, you're at risk of a whole lot of things, at that age.
Right.
We're not always, we're a little daring. We're not always thinking, the brain kicks in later. We're designed like this. Intellect controls the emotions, except if you're a teenage male and you throw in some influence, you get a reversal, you get the emotions, and the intellect catches up later and says, oh, what did I just do?
Right.
So yeah, that's obviously the group that we target. Most of us that if you went to college, I've talked to a lot of folks that went to college and they forgot to go to class because they're hanging out 18 to 24-year partying, doing whatever they were doing. And a lot of bad decisions. And a lot of the folks I talk to, they'll say, when I was in college, I was wild. I made a lot of dumb decisions. But once I graduated, I put all that behind me and I walked away. So that tells me that it's the 18 to 24-year age group that is very vulnerable. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's worth, I think they need to know that. And, I don't really see it promoted very much. And if I ever get involved with promoting this program, I think the high risk, knowing they're high risk, it's not if you're going to be in a sketchy situation, it's almost when. Well, and you need to be ready to make the right decision when that time comes.
Right. Well, there's testosterone going on in there. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, if you can make it as a male, if you can make it out of past 24, you're probably going to live to be a ripe old man, But,
if you can make it.
and you still got your teeth. You don't have any broken bones.
Right.
But that's what makes it fun, I guess. Exciting.
You told me a story yesterday about someone. Would you be willing to share that story? Because I think it really paints the picture of a start, the long-term consequence that individual, when they made that decision. Without using any names, would you be able to share that story?
Which story? I mean, I'm known to tell a lot of stories.
It was a master sergeant.
Oh yeah,
I forgot you're a chief. You have way too many stories. I got to be specific.
Yeah. I'm sorry,
it's the
guys.
Master sergeant.
I'm sorry, whoever's listening to this podcast. I told you I'll put that disclaimer in here now. So, as a retired chief, I got a lot of stories.
Right.
And as a retired chief, I assume everybody wants to hear them. One of the first cases I had as a drug alcohol counselor in the early 90s is I had a master sergeant referred to me. He was actually on terminal leave, so he'd had 23 years and 11 months of service. And how he got identified for drug use was his airman. He's a master sergeant. The airman went to the flight sergeant and said, "Hey, so and so, is he going to pay me back?" Because he had borrowed money from these airmen, but he had a lot of money and hadn't repaid it. And so they're like, oh, okay. So they brought him back in off terminal leave, confronted him about borrowing money from airmen, and he disclosed that he had been using crack cocaine. And so, of course, he kept testing positive. So you talked about the BICL, part of the BICL process, and of course we put him in the alcohol and drug rehab program. But he kept testing positive, and it is possible for a bad situation to get worse. And so I tell people that all the time when I was doing counseling. Hey, you had a positive drug test. It can get worse. Stop.
Take a knee.
Stop for a while here, because every time there's another incident, they restart the case and they add more paperwork. And right now they're going to just put you out. But they might end up having to court-martial you because you're just building you're building your resume, so to speak.
Right.
So in this case, they ended up 23 years, 11 months. Convicted, bad conduct discharge, and everybody can imagine what comes with a bad conduct discharge. There's no retirement with that. Right. There's no VA benefits.
Jeez.
And so, a very sad case. And so, Yeah, I think that's the story. So I remember that, and unfortunately for him, it was a little too late.
And he ended up going to prison.
He got 11 months confinement, and when he got out of confinement, the bad conduct discharge. And yeah, unfortunately, if you ever been to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, it says, and this is the word, and I'm going to say, it's going to sound kind of crass. They'll say, some must die that others may live. And what that means is some people have to be the example for us. And so for me, the success I had in my life is there are some folks, they have to go through it themselves before they learn. Fortunately for me, I was always somebody, I could see somebody else going through something, right, and I said, I ain't doing that. I remember there was a Toyota commercial years ago, and I wish I had a copy of it. It was this group of friends, they're young friends, they're men and women. They're looking out over this waterfall. It looks probably in Hawaii, beautiful waterfall. And all of a sudden, there's this guy on this kayak. You hear, woo! And this guy comes over the waterfall on his kayak, and then all of a sudden he crashes and burns off of all these rocks, and just destroys him. And the one friend looks at the other one and goes, why did he do that? And so fortunately, I lived my life to go, why did he do that?
Right.
I am not doing that. And so
you just reminded me of like a scared straight moment I had as an airman. So when I was at Shepherd going through aerospace ground equipment tech school, I don't know why this happened, but like one of the instructors like pulled me to come pick up some guy from prison.
Right.
Like I was like a witness. I don't know exactly, but suddenly I was in this guy's truck going to a prison to pick up this airman. And on the way there, I'm kind of asking questions, like what's going on? Like,
right.
Who are we picking up?
Yeah.
And this scared the hell out of me. So we go to the prison. It looks awful. It's like one giant bay of bunk beds. It's not like a hardcore prison, right? But it still looked just terrible. Like I do not want to be in there. We get the airman, and he's still an airman. He's been in jail for like 5 years. Yeah. He's still an airman, technically. Yeah. We pick him up, and he just looks like he's been through hell. And he is so happy. He's on cloud 9 to be out of prison finally. Oh my gosh, I'm finally out, looking around. Oh, I want to eat this and that. And he's just so happy to be out of jail finally. And I'm like, man, what happened? Yeah. And he's like, I was in tech school like you. He's like, I became a drug dealer, and I got 5 years in prison. So I was like, this guy just came out of a time capsule. Yeah. Like 1 minute he's an airman.
It's a sad state of affairs.
That's what I'm saying. Like 1 minute he's this airman with his whole future ahead of him. 5 years later, he's the same person. He just lost 5 years of his life, but he didn't grow at all. He still seemed like that kid. And that just disturbed the hell out of me. Yeah. I was like, I do not want to be that. Yeah. So talk about a scared straight moment.
Well, yeah, we're all motivated by different things, Fortunately for me, that was always a motivator. I don't want to get in any trouble, Right. So that sometimes, but there are other folks, they relish on hey, I could potentially get in trouble for this. Let's do it.
I'm telling you, alcohol is that factor. That I don't drink anymore. It's been 5 years, 6 years now. I put it behind me, but there was a time where like it was not good for me. I was just couldn't stop drinking, and I've shared this story plenty of times. But all my close calls and all my bad decisions, alcohol was the factor.
Was there with you?
It was the one consistent with all of that chaos. Yeah. That was the one consistent. Yeah. And once it's not a part of my life anymore, things just got a whole lot easier. Yeah. So I do want to point out that can definitely change your state of mind.
It is, it does alter. It's called mind altering. Yeah. And that's my concern with, when we're talking about marijuana use, it alters, right? If it didn't, then we wouldn't want to use it, right? Right. I mean, other than to sustain life, if it wasn't for the needing to sustain life, we probably wouldn't drink water because it really doesn't do anything for you except make you feel less thirsty. But that's my concern with marijuana is it has to be doing something. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. Right. And unfortunately, the little bit of stuff that we do know about it is that it is a hallucinogen, which means that it alters a time and space, perceptions of time and space. And that seems pretty important to me at times. I would want that to
Right.
be accurately perceiving space and time. And so to me, that's the concern that I have with it is I don't think at this point we can fully appreciate the little things that it can influence. Alcohol, sometimes it's very obvious because, you're highly intoxicated. The behavior reflects that. But I think there's little other things yet that we're yet to discover about marijuana use that I think we're going to look back on it and say, wow, we should have saw that coming.
Which, hey, that leads us into our third topic, the future of the policy. And I'm just going to hit you with this question right out the gate.
Yeah.
There's people wondering, people serving, will marijuana ever be legal in the military? I know this is just your opinion I'm asking here.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are curious about that because it's legal in so many areas with prescriptions. Do you foresee that ever impacting the DoD, or do you think that's always going to be separate?
Yeah, I can't see the future. I can't speak for the Air Force at all or DoD.
That's why I said your opinion.
Yeah, I've been on conversations. I know we're concerned about it, and I know it's a topic of discussions, and I know it's come up several times with the National Defense Authorization Acts. Sometimes congressmen want to put little riders on there about marijuana, the legalization, and so every time our DoD team. Drug demand regulatory team, they're constantly talking to our lawmakers to say, hey, slow down, give us a chance to think through this. We need to figure out what we're going to do with it. If it goes that direction, we got to know how we're going to implement. That's going to take a little bit, what's going to be acceptable, what's not. So right now it's a no.
Right.
But hey, things change. Who would have thought we'd even be this place with the state level 10 years ago? Colorado, I was in Colorado when it first came. They were kind of the first state, and we are where we are now. So I can't speak. I obviously don't have any authority. I don't have any influence on it, but if you see the trend, it looks like it's trending one way. We just don't know what we're going to do with it. However, there's two groups of people in the war, in America anyway, that we were concerned about. One is our military, and the other one is our Department of Transportation.
Really?
Well, do you want 18 guys driving 18-wheelers stoned?
No, I don't want that.
Or whatever term it is. So I think the DOT it's between DOD and the Department of Transportation, we have some concerns.
Right.
Because DOD, we handle a lot of heavy weaponry. There's a lot of bad things that can happen. And of course, the Department of Transportation, we share the highways with, people driving some pretty big, powerful, when you get that momentum. Before joining the Air Force, I worked for the railroad, and people don't understand. You try to outrun a train, that train doesn't stop. It takes a long time, and an 18-wheeler is the same way. It stops a little faster, but when it collides with something, there's
disintegrates.
There's impact. Yeah,
right.
It's not a fender bender.
Right. Absolutely. So I just asked your opinion on something, but how about what's factual? The policy that you can speak on that for certain. You can, that's changing in the near future.
I'm not aware of anything that's changing immediately. It's status quo for right now. In fact, you probably we even added something a couple of years ago, THC-8. You're familiar with THC-9, which is associated with marijuana. THC-8 is a hemp. It comes from hemp. It's been modified to get high, to make. Otherwise, there again, why would I use THC-8 if I'm not getting anything out of it?
This is like the gummies, the stuff that's sold frequently in the public at like smoke shops, right?
Yeah, it's usually marketed for the THC-8, and it's a version of, it's a hemp product that's been modified for effect, And so we actually tested it for the military. In fact, we, THC-8, it shows up. Used to, it would be a THC-9, and a couple of years ago, they introduced testing for this THCA.
So that is a relatively new addition.
Probably within the last, I can't remember exactly, within the last 4 years.
I think I remember seeing the memo where it's like anything hemp related, you are not to mess with.
That has always been that's been the policy going back to about 2000. If you read the front page of the AFMAN 44197, it has always said hemp products are off limits. And mainly because we'd have individuals that come say, oh, I tested positive for marijuana use because I used hemp. I was using hemp lotion. And so kind of the philosophy, and there again, this is kind of me speaking, how I interpreted that was, okay, we'll take that off the table then. That can't be a defense because
right.
So there's a difference between illicit use. So marijuana is illicit use. If you use hemp products, it's considered prohibited. If you look at the front of the DAFMAN, it says prohibited. So it's not illicit like you would use marijuana or cocaine or something like that, but it's a prohibited substance. Per DAFMAN 44197, you who wear the uniform, you are prohibited from using these products.
Gotcha.
And so that's the difference. Prohibited, illicit. So. Gotcha.
Anything else on the future of the policy you'd like to discuss? No,
I think it's we'll have to see. It's going to be a big change. I think it could be. I shouldn't say it is going, but we expect that as things progress, it may look different than it does now.
Right. But as the world changes,
everything has changed. It's unbelievable. But anyway, so I do want to end this out there, though. If there's individuals out there, so coming out of COVID, I expected that we were going to have an increase in positive drug tests.
Was that factual? Did that happen?
I would say it's factual. We have had an increase. I'm not prepared to speak how big an increase, but I would say there was an increase.
So you
initially
noticed a little spike on the graph?
I would say there was. I think anybody would say, yeah, there appears to have been some increase. But if you think about it, we were locked down and we were alone. Nobody knew what we were doing. And so I think there were individuals who said, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And so coming out of COVID, we actually intentionally, I worked with my health promotions folks. We said, we want to get the word out there. Hey, you need to know that these products are off limits. They're prohibited or they're illicit. However, if you're somebody who crossed the line, get help.
Right.
Okay. Before you get tagged for a drug test, because you will get tagged for a drug test because every one of you that wears the uniform will have to give a drug test. If you're somebody, when you were secreted away by yourself and you crossed the line, stop and get help if you can't quit. And so we did a great job of marketing the confidential stuff. Obviously, you can go to ADAPT, but obviously ADAPT is going to have to notify by regulation. They'll notify your command. But there's MFLAX, there's other agencies out there that you can utilize to say, I need to get back on the right side of this. Right. And so that's important. So if there's individuals that happen to listen to this podcast, hey, it's not what you've done up to this point, but it's what you do from this point forward that's going to make the most. And so if somebody who's been skirting on the edge, go ahead and get it right for yourself. Set yourself up for success. Keep your future in your hands, and don't hand it over to somebody else to decide for you.
Absolutely.
And if you can't do that, definitely seek out somebody that can help talk you through that.
Absolutely. I actually know someone, I won't say their name or anything, but they were prescribed Adderall and it became a problem, and they self-identified. That person got help and is still serving.
Sure.
Because they asked for help, they pointed out, hey, this is a problem. And that has a whole different route on how that's treated versus if someone were to fail a drug test or an accident occurred because of an addiction. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I think if anyone's listening to this, because some people seek this stuff out, I expect this episode to be sought out by folks that either failed a test or that are doing something illicit, and they're just curious to how it plays out. I think this could be the catalyst for that person to stop and seek help.
Man, I used to always tell folks, if you would put as much energy into promoting yourself, meaning not necessarily getting a promotion in your rank, but advocating for yourself, that you do trying to fly under the radar and get away with stuff. If you'd only use that creativity that you're using to try to circumvent the system and get away with stuff, and harness that and use it to your benefit, man, you're going to have an amazing life. And so that's what I brought from me from when I was in high school, that I said I had regrets. I said, man, if I can only channel all this stuff that I have going in my head to get around stuff and to get away with stuff, and I use that to become, instead of an evil genius,
right?
It's kind of like Gru on use that for good. I'm probably going to be pretty happy at the end of it.
and you've done phenomenal. I mean, as far as careers go, you had an amazing career. You're still a civilian, still getting after it. Your son is an officer now. I mean, from what I'm seeing, you've had the ideal military career and civilian life. Yeah.
Well, two things for that: good wife. There's got to marry the right person. That really it takes you a long way. You marry the right person. That my wife, Margaret. So a lot of the credit for the kids go to her, because I was really investing a lot of time, and of course my spiritual life. Is good boundaries. Good is very. So those two things, I like to take a little bit of credit of it because I lived it. However, there's a lot of stuff that was out of my control, and you've lived a life. There's a lot in our control, but there's a whole lot of stuff that gets thrown at us that, by the grace of God, you're grateful that you're not alone, right. And that it's not final. There's very few things in life that's final. Your final breath, that's it. But a lot of the other things, your higher power, your family, your good friends, those are going to pull you through it. As long as you stay in the fight. And I've had to say that many times, stay in the fight. Stay with me, stay in the fight. As long as you stay fighting, I'm right beside you. I got your back. So let me know if you can't do that, and we'll take it to another level if we need to. So,
wow, right. Steve, we talked about the point of DDR, and I asked you a million questions that I'm sure every random airman on this base.
I hope I made up some good answers.
I think so. Like, I usually go to an hour. This is an hour and a half that we've been talking, because I just kept thinking of more questions.
Sure.
So thanks for bearing with me with that. But the whole point of the program, we talked about, past mistakes people made, how that played out, how thinking of your future is so important, some high risk areas. And then we talked about, how the world changes and that could affect policy one day, maybe. But ultimately, Steve, I learned so much just sitting here talking with you. I think you're a great man, a great retired chief, and I just want to thank you for visiting us here at Eglin, for coming out here, spending time with us, honoring Karen on her retirement, and then coming on to the HeroFront podcast. So just want to thank you, Steve, for doing that.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor. I'm glad you asked. I was a little anxious, but in the end, it feels good.
Absolutely. Hey, I told you, chiefs are the best guests.
Well, I hope so.
They will drop some knowledge.
Well, I have to say this. We recently lost Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Bob Gaylor, and you talk about a mentor and a loss. We lost him. I don't know if you ever had a chance to speak to him, but wisdom, very down to earth. Stuff you can. That's one thing to talk philosophy. He could give you. He could tell you stuff that you could walk out this door and use.
Absolutely
today. So
I'm a part of the Air Force Sergeants Association headquarters team, and I can tell you that Chief Gaylor came to every annual event, and this last one in August in Dallas, he was there, and the love that people showed him by the thousands.
Oh, what a man.
He was still cracking jokes. He was still telling stories. And I have to say that was the last AFSA, sadly, that he will attend. But it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, to honor somebody like I saw that last one that he attended. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it definitely touched a lot of lives and made a huge difference, and definitely going to miss him, So, well, thank you, Josh, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely. This was the hero's journey of Steve Callon, and we're out.